ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. In January 2015, when we launched the Sikh manifesto, there were issues in there around discrimination. There were issues around hate crime. And what I'm going to do in the next 20 or so minutes is share with you the results from the UK Sikh survey, a survey we carried out almost a year after the general election, about what are you saying about discrimination, what are you saying about hate crime. And some of these things have actually already been played out in the national mainstream media. Politicians have actually started to use the results from the survey and to knock on people's doors and ask, what are you doing? So let me try and share some of these statistics. The first statistic I'm going to share with you is around discrimination in the workplace. We asked a question, how many of you in the last 12 months have experienced discrimination at work? And 1 in 7, or 14% of Sikhs, said they had experienced discrimination in the last 12 months. Now, no one knows, is that too high? Is it too low? But firstly, discrimination is an offence under law. So ideally, there should be no discrimination. But the fact that 1 in 7 of you say there is discrimination in the workplace means there is a problem, and a problem that must be addressed by policymakers and government. Now, what we also found is that turban-wearing Sikhs are more likely to experience discrimination than non-turban-wearing Sikhs. So therefore, this issue is intertwined with our identity. Let me now talk about some of the other statistics. One issue is obviously in the workplace, but also outside of the workplace, in the public space, when we're out on the streets, when we go to a sporting event, we go to a cafe, anywhere we go, a public place, we asked, have you faced discrimination in a public place? Have you experienced discrimination from public officials? Have you experienced hate crime, which is often verbal or physical abuse? And what we found is that 1 in 5 Sikhs, 21%, said they had experienced discrimination. Now, that number is way too high. 1 in 5 in the last 12 months. If you take that 21% in the last 12 months and multiply it by the number of Sikhs in this country, then another headline emerged from the UK Sikh survey to say over 100,000 Sikhs in this country have experienced hate crime in the last 12 months. And many academics, many politicians and many others have questioned these statistics. And what they said is, well, how can the number be 100,000 for Sikhs? Because in total, the total number of hate crimes reported by all communities amounts to about 63,000. And we've pointed out one very simple fact. In 2013, the Home Office conducted what's called a crime survey. And they reported that at that time, in 2013, there were probably around 283,000 hate crimes. But at that time, only 15% were being reported. And that's the issue about the UK Sikh survey. When we asked the question, have you experienced hate crime, verbal or physical abuse in the last 12 months? Whilst 21% said yes, had we asked how many of you reported, the number would have been a tiny fraction, and there are 2 reasons for that. Firstly, when you're out and about, out on the street, someone shouts verbal abuse to you, it's technically breaking the law. It's a hate crime. But how many of us would actually go to the effort of going to a police station and reporting that as a crime? Chances are virtually no one. And that doesn't just apply to the Sikh community, it applies to other communities. They feel they're probably wasting the police time, because we also know the police don't tend to take these things seriously in terms of successful prosecutions, them investigating, because they will target their efforts on what they deem more serious crime. So that's the fundamental problem, is that verbal abuse, which may account for 95% of those that responded, tend not to be reported. Now let's take the more serious case of physical abuse. Physical abuse, attacks, they do happen. Let's take the case of the Sikh dentist that was in a North Wales Tesco store, was attacked with a machete. Very widely reported in the national and international media. Let's take that elderly gentleman in Coventry that was attacked by a group of youngsters, and it was video recorded. He died later following that attack. These things are not something that just happen in America and in other countries. They happen in this country. And they happen all too often, especially since 9/11. And therefore, whenever you get issues, 7/7, Brexit, you get a rise. Something happens abroad, Sikhs look different, they get targeted. And therefore, when you look at attacks, if it's a serious attack, clearly it's going to be reported to the police. But how many of you, say children going to school, have been attacked because of the way they look, because they look different, they have a turban, could be even because of the colour of skin alone? How many people actually report that as a crime? It could happen to older people walking through town, going through a park, going through an alley. And often, as Sikhs, we're told to stand our ground, to defend our position. It's not in our DNA to go running off to the police and report these crimes. And therefore, it's not surprising that the statistics that they hold are a tiny fraction of the actual hate crime that's going on. Now this leaves us with a dilemma as a community. We know, and the UK Sikh survey shows, that more Sikhs, or a very high percentage of Sikhs, are being verbally and physically abused. And it's a crime, it's a hate crime. And yet, very few will report it. And therefore, authorities will not act. We also highlighted in the UK Sikh survey findings report that actually, when we shared these findings with the chair of the Select Committee for Women and Equalities, the Right Honourable Maria Miller, she immediately wrote to the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, and also to the Chief Executive of the Civil Service, John Manzoni. She wrote to them on the 15th of November last year. And the Home Secretary has written back. And the Home Secretary has acknowledged that these statistics on discrimination in the workplace, which she said is an offence and is illegal, and also discrimination and hate in public spaces, is something that must be stamped out in relation to the Sikh community. Now this is at odds with the government's own hate crime action plan published in July 2016 after the Brexit vote, where that 40-page report largely talked about attacks and hate against the Muslim community and the Jewish community, and to some degree the Christian community. Sikhs were, and we've said this many times, were airbrushed out of the hate crime action plan. The government has now been forced to acknowledge, through the UK Sikh survey, through the likes of Maria Miller, to put in writing at the most senior levels that hate crime is an issue where Sikhs are being targeted. And actually, for us, it's not a new phenomenon. It's been a phenomenon that's been there from the time of our gurus. But in the UK, it's been more of an issue since 9/11 because of the events of 9/11 and what's been popularly termed mistaken identity. Therefore, what the UK Sikh survey does is present a number of statistics about how we're being discriminated against. Let me share one more statistic. We asked how many people in the Sikh community had faced discrimination in the last 12 months from public officials. And 1 in 12, or 8%, say they'd experienced discrimination. And we asked them to give examples. Police officers came at the top, then came immigration officers at airports or security staff, but there were teachers, there were lecturers, there were council staff. In other words, whenever Sikhs interact with public services, they are also facing discrimination. And if you take those statistics together, underreporting of crime, well, if you're being discriminated against by a police officer, it's not surprising. And so those statistics were also shared with the Home Secretary. And clearly, she's written back to say she would like to follow up any of those cases in relation to police officers. Now, this is the start of a conversation with government. Using the UK Sikh survey on discrimination and hate crime, we've been able to move the goalposts. The government weren't talking about hate crime targeting Sikhs. Now, the Home Secretary has acknowledged in writing she's been to a Gurdwara in December, Sri Guru Singh Sabha in Southall, and talked about hate crime. Why? Because she was forced into it by the letter from Maria Miller and by the follow-up action that we've been able to take. The Cabinet Office now are thinking about this in terms of discrimination within the civil service. And actually, are they doing enough to make sure Sikhs that work within local government, within the health service, within central government, are they being discriminated against? I'm now going to talk about grooming and conversions. What the UK Sikh survey showed is more than 1 in 7 Sikh women indicated they had been targeted by grooming gangs. That is a horrendous number. The number of non-Sikhs that picked up on that statistic, 1 in 7 of all Sikh women said they'd been targeted by grooming gangs. And these were largely women under the age of 30. And remember, this survey was only 16 years and over. Now that is linked to some of the issues we talked about in the past. These are subjects that often people don't like to talk about. But grooming is an offence. Whoever carries out grooming should be punished. And it doesn't matter who the victims are, Sikh, non-Sikh. The issue is government must get serious about who are the groomers. They must understand the victims and help the victims. And what these statistics in the UK Sikh survey do is give very powerful information to government and to decision-making bodies such as local government, the police. And it says, here is a problem. The numbers tell us. You've told us in responding to the survey. We must ask, what are you doing about it? What are politicians doing about it? What are policymakers doing about it? Because this problem has been largely hidden. It's only been cases like the Rotherham case that's really brought this home, or the cases in Oxford, because there, those that were being targeted were often white. But this has been a hidden phenomenon that we've talked about as a community, but the media hasn't been that interested, the police haven't been that interested, and politicians and policymakers haven't been that interested. But now we're knocking on an open door. Therefore, work with us When we talk about discrimination and hate crime, it affects every single one of you. Whether it's your children, whether it's you at work, whether it's you in the public space. It doesn't matter if you've kept your visible identity or not. If you're brown-skinned, the Sikh dentist that was attacked with a machete in North Wales wasn't wearing a turban. So in other words, there is no room in today's society for discrimination or hate crime. But what we must do is make sure we raise our voices. Survey is helpful, but one of the initiatives that the Sikh network is taking is now more people are being trained as third-party reporters. The Sikh network itself is a place you can go and report hate crime. The Sikh helpline is accredited for you to report hate crime. Guru Nanak Gurdwara Smethik is a place that is accredited where you can go and report hate crime. And what we'll be doing from the 1st of April is the Sikh network will launch a portal, an online portal which will allow you to record hate crime and for that hate crime to then be reported to the police. And we think if we do this collectively as a community, from the results of the UK Sikh survey, which were backward looking, if we start reporting every single hate crime, even that smallest of verbal abuse, because it's a crime, all of a sudden those statistics can be used. This is, after all, what the Jewish community has been doing for many, many years. They report, 450 cases a year of hate crime. And every single Jewish school, and there's 50 of them, they receive £12 million for security. I can tell you none of our Sikh schools get any money from government for security. And yet, I bet you our numbers are much higher. But because we don't collect that information and report it, we are losing out as a community. So I think the whole point about the UK Sikh survey is it allows people to have a conversation with us with hard statistics. But it also means we need to respond as a community. And the best way to respond to discrimination and hate crime is start using the ability to report and using that information we can get parts of government to start to respond to our needs and your needs sitting at home. So again, with this issue of discrimination and hate crime, KTV Sky 858 has allowed us the opportunity to bring these messages into your homes to better your lives. And I think it's my duty, your duty, sitting at home to support KTV, because if we can use our media to educate, to bring knowledge, to arm you with the tools that you need, it will mean that your lives and the lives of our community will improve, and we can make sure that the taxes that you pay are used appropriately by those who make decisions on our behalf. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.